Good evening, everybody. Hope that you are doing extremely well and having an outstanding week. I am filling in for Mitchell tonight. He filled in for me a lot over the last week when I was going taking my parents, getting to spend time with them and taking them back up to Michigan together. And so please be praying for him. He is doing great, and I am very, very thankful to have a brother like that to work with and to stand together in the ministry. So, but please be praying for him as he's had a lot of things going on in life recently. Now, I also want to remind you to please be praying for Karan. It's really important right now. I really want to encourage you to, if you can, take some time to fast and pray. It's a really big issue for her. If she doesn't get her visa extended, then she has to go back, and she really wants to be with her, her family. So please be praying for her. Also, Lori Gilbert still has some medical procedures this week. If you can continue praying for her as well. Tonight's class, I want to talk to you again, continuing as Mitchell has been doing on Portraits of Christ. Just taking a look at Jesus to see how we can learn to live in the way that he wants us to. And I want to talk about how Jesus handled stress. So in saying that, I want to ask you first, as an individual, how are you dealing with all the stress? There's so much going on in the world right now. We have the COVID virus and all the different things, and a little surge coming back up in the state of Florida, one of those places. The racial disturbances, the protests, the violence, the political conflicts, the social pressures, the job issues. Now we have a new dust storm coming in, actually, which is really interesting. But there's a lot of things going on, and a lot of people are feeling a bit overwhelmed. Some people are spending a lot more time at home and dealing with children issues and all the different things, job issues. So how do you do this? And the question is, did Jesus ever really have stress? Did he ever feel troubled? And man, like this is a lot to deal with. And I want you to step back and take a different perspective. I want you to look at it from the eyes of Jesus for a little bit. What kind of pressures did he have in his day-to-day life? So I wrote down a few things that I think will be valuable just to think about, and to think about what it would be to take on this responsibility. So his life and pressures, one, constant criticism by the leaders of the society. And not just in general, not just saying he's a Christian, but singling him out, as calling him evil names, calling him Satan, even though he was from God. It would be hard to deal with people calling you names like that, especially when you were the creator of everything. But he goes on. I just got a few more things to add. That everywhere he went, people wanted something. And in my world, in medicine, sometimes it's a bit overwhelming to me when I work all day taking care of all these different people. I go somewhere else and take care of these people and go somewhere else. And sometimes I feel like, I just want a little bit of break. Did Jesus ever feel like that? Then you think about, Jesus had the pressure of unable to sin one time. He couldn't give in one time. If he gives in to sin one time, everything fails. Just one bad attitude, one thing that he shouldn't have said, one thing that he fell into sin and temptation. And yet it says he was tempted in every way. So think about the pressure of just having to do that, to live a perfect day, every day of your life. And then you think about this, he had to train 12 men to change the world, and he had 3 years to do it. And so just think about what it would have been like. So you're trying to get this done, and you deal with the challenges of their day-to-day mistakes. And you think, man, we already talked about this 14 times last week. How come you keep doing this? And this pressure that he had to feel over and over again. And just think about, here he is at the Last Supper, and he's taught them. He spent this 3 years with them. He's got just a few more hours of communication with him ever. Well, until he's resurrected again. But he's just got these few hours, and what do? They get into an argument about who's the greatest as he's talking about being betrayed. You have to feel like that would have been a little bit of a stressful situation. Think, man, did I fail? What's going on with these people? And then, how many times along the way did he share with people, knowing that what he was sharing would change their life, and how many times he was rejected over and over and over again. And then even think about this, all your life down the road that you're going to be betrayed, you're going to be tortured, and you're going to be killed on a cross. And you just have to wonder what things may have reminded him of those things in his day-to-day life. So I say all those things to say that Jesus had a lot of pressure just from what he had to deal with, and then he has to deal with people. And I want to bring up some specific examples. And I want you to turn to the book of John, if you would. And we're going to go through 4 or 5 different times where it talks about when Jesus was troubled, meaning his spirit was stirred up. There was something going on that was causing him trouble or pressure that was bothering him. And we're going to start where Mitchell talked about recently in John chapter 11. And I want you to read with me in verse 38. And this is after Lazarus had died. And Jesus had come, and Mary and Martha had talked to him. And we're not going to break all this down, but I want to just pay attention to a couple things. And so if we read in verse 38, it says this: Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. So deeply moved, his heart was stirred up. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days." Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" And this concept of being deeply moved, and if you look up a little bit further, I skipped it by accident, but it talks about him being troubled. It's in verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. This is Jesus, the creator of the universe, is deeply moved in spirit. And this is a great thing about Jesus, is even though he had the answer and he knew what was going to happen, it still stirred his soul to see the pain in other people's life. So sometimes we can feel like, man, how did Jesus, he already knew the outcome and it wouldn't bother him how people felt, but it does. So when Jesus was dealing with people in all these different situations you read in the scriptures, he had the emotional connection with people. He is not unattached. This is a really great thing to think about God. But not being unattached is painful sometimes too, because you care deeply about people. And so here you see Jesus, he's in this situation, he comes in there, he knows he's got the answer, but he's deeply moved, and he has a heart to care about people. And it's really hard, I know in medicine for me, it's hard to have deep concern for every single situation that you have. And so how do you deal with it when you have problem after problem after problem going along the way, and you care about each one of them? How is it that you can keep your focus and not get overwhelmed with what's going on? If Jesus focused only on that situation, about how heavy this situation was and how heavy that situation is, you know what? He would have been overwhelmed. But if you look at the story, what you find out is Jesus never loses his focus. He comes there to raise Lazarus. And even though he gets hurt, he gets in touch with the people around him and has pain, he still has the ability to go on and raise Lazarus. Now, that seems kind of like an obvious thing, but I want you to think about that. That thing ended in good, but it didn't always end in good. So if you hold your place in John, I want you to turn to Mark chapter 10, and I want to show you a story where it didn't go so well, and that Jesus did care about somebody, and they totally rejected him. So Mark chapter 10, verse 17. This is a story about the rich young man, or often called the rich young ruler. In verse 17, it says, as Jesus started on his way, a man ran up and fell on his knees before him. He says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He says, "Why do you call me good?" Jesus answered, "No one is good except God alone. You know the commandments. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false testimony, do not defraud and honor your father and mother." Teacher, he said, "All these I have kept since I was a boy." Jesus looked at him and what? And he loved him. His heart went out to him. He had this connection. He says, "One thing you lack, go sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." At this, the man's face fell, and he went away sad because he had great wealth. So I want you to think about Jesus. He cares deeply about this man, just like he cared about Mary and Martha. But what happens is this guy rejects Jesus. And you know what Jesus does? He lets him go. And this is a really, really important concept. That when you care about people, you still can't make their decisions for them. You still can't even take on the responsibility of those decisions because Jesus didn't. Jesus allowed the person to reject him and walk away. And it's really important in your life that you do a couple things for the stress. One is you speak the truth in love. You tell the people the truth. You allow yourself to care about people. First you care, and then you tell them the truth. And it may not be what they always want to hear, and this wasn't what he wanted to hear. But even though it wasn't what he wanted to hear, he could have responded the right way. But he didn't. Here's what I see a lot of people doing. I see a lot of people taking on a lot of burdens, but they're unwilling to speak the truth in love. They don't say what the person really needs to hear. So you walk away still carrying a heavy burden because you know you didn't do what you could have done. But once you know what you've done what you could have done, that's all you do. It's like the story of the watchman in Ezekiel. You have this responsibility to tell people the truth, but then after that, people have to make their own decisions. God gives those people the chance to make it. It's like me in medicine. If I have a person who has a serious medical problem and I tell them, you can do this, but they say, no, I'm not going to do it, I can't make them do it. And I can care deeply for that person, but they still sometimes don't do it. So you have to have the ability to say, okay, I've done what I can do. I can let them walk away. And I'm not trying to be insensitive, but Jesus does that. And if you go through the scriptures, one of the things I want you to do if you want to learn how to deal with stress, go through and watch all Jesus' interactions, realizing the stress that he's under, realizing the pressure that he has for caring about those individuals, but he still lets them make the decision because he speaks the truth to them. But he doesn't lose his focus. He doesn't lose his focus. And he goes on after that and teaches the people around him, his disciples, if you go back and read what we just read about the rich young ruler in Mark 10. So I want to go on to another example in John. Let's go back to John. We have 4 or 5 examples over and over about about Jesus as he goes through basically the last week or so of his life. And so if you look again in John chapter 12, verse 27. Let's read that together. And it says this. We're going to go up just a little bit in verse 23. Jesus said, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. He knows he's going to die. He's telling his apostles, hey, time is upon us right now. I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. The man who loves his life will lose it, while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant will also be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Then he says this, now, Jesus says, my heart is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. So I want you to think about this. Here's Jesus realizing that he is that kernel of wheat that has to go and die. He's realizing that all those things that he knew was going to happen to him from a long time ago, and he's the author of all this, but he knows soon he's going to be betrayed, tortured, and killed on the cross. And he doesn't let that overwhelm him. He feels the stress, he feels the pressure of it, but his response is, God, take me from this thing that you've called me to be, you've asked me to do? He says, no. This is why I came. This is my purpose. He says, through this, God, glorify my name. Glorify your name. So I want you to think about when stress comes up, what takes you off your focus? What takes you off your purpose? If you are a disciple, you have a purpose, you have a focus that's greater than anything here on the earth. And that's one of the things that Jesus was able to do. He knew what was most important always. And even though he felt the pain of the individual situations, he felt the pressure of his own death, he realized that this was going to happen. But his response was to keep his focus and remember why he was here. Here's what happens to us. We forget who we are, and we forget why we're here. You're not here just to go to work to earn a paycheck, to go to work to earn a paycheck. That's not why you're here. You're not here just to become really good at something. Those are all fine things to do. This is part of life. Hopefully you excel at whatever you can do. But you're here to make a difference in lives for an eternity. And I think we get so mixed up that we allow the things of the world to take pressures that keep us off our focus, and then we get worse and we feel more and more stressed. I want you to step back and think, the last time you get stressed, did you stop and think, hey, I got a different purpose than the rest of the world around me. I've got a purpose that matters for eternity. I've got a purpose that God has called me to be. He's called me to be a different person, regardless of this going on. Jesus was able to do that. And he's trying to teach us how to do it. He's telling us, hey, I feel this trouble. I feel it. Which is really another really important step, to share what you really feel with those around you. But Jesus is telling them, hey, I feel this, but I'm telling you, don't get caught up in that moment. Be focused on what the future holds. Be focused on where you're going. Be focused on what your purpose is. And we lose it because the pressures of the stress take us off from that and we get overwhelmed. This is going to be a theme over and over again. You're going to see this as we go through this topic. So let's go to John 13. So here he is at the Last Supper. Now, if you go in verse 21, we see Jesus being troubled again. So I'll start up a little bit above that to give the background. He says this, I'm telling you now, in verse 18, I am referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen, but this is to fulfill the scripture. He who shares my bread has lifted up his heel against me. He's talking about being betrayed. He says, I'm telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am he. I tell you the truth. Whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. Then he says this, after he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit. Again, he's troubled. They could see it around him. They could see it was bothering him. And he said, I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. Now think how that would be if you were Jesus. You knew that was going to happen all along, but you still loved him. You still cared for him. It goes back to the empathy. Jesus still cared for him even though he was caught up in sin. So he always cares for you. That's a really great thing. But he still didn't let it affect the way he treated him because nobody knew that he was the one that was going to betray him. So Jesus kept his focus no matter what happened. And here it's the moment is right there. He could stop it. He could turn him in front of everybody else. And he didn't. He told him to go ahead and do what he's supposed to, he wanted to do. But I want to ask you, how would you act if you knew someone was betraying you or someone was going to do something bad to you? Would you let it change who you are? Jesus didn't. He kept his focus on what was most important. He knew that where he was going right now, over the next 12 hours, was going to be the whole destiny of mankind. So he goes on, he says in verse 22, his disciples, they stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to his disciple and said, ask him which one he means. Leaning back against Jesus, he asked, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I dip it in the dish. Then dipping the piece of bread he gave it to Judas Iscariot, son of Simon. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. What you are about to do quickly, Jesus told him. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the feast or to give something to the poor. As soon as Jesus had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. So I want you to think about this for a minute. Wouldn't that have knocked you off course a bit? Wouldn't that have taken you away from what you were trying to do? But Jesus, if you read following that, he goes back and he starts teaching people. Here's a cool thing. Look down in verse 34. Something we read about all the time. A new command I give you, love one another. So Jesus is still trying to teach his disciples the very last moments of their time together. And this is also the time when they start arguing about who is greatest when you go back and read in the other gospel. So when you think about this situation, would you do that? See, because we get so caught up in the stress that we feel for the moment, we lose our focus. We lose our ability to teach. We lose our ability to give. And when we lose that ability to give, the stress will overwhelm us. So I want you to think about trying to learn from Jesus. Let's go to John 14. This troubling thing comes up over and over again. Verse 1. So he's told him he's going to die. He told him he's going to be betrayed. And in verse 1, he says this, do not let your hearts be troubled. It's like, right. That's the easy thing to do, right? Jesus, we've given our life to you. We've given all we have to you, and now you're telling us you're going to die? He says, no. He says, trust in God, trust also in me. And this is another key besides having the right focus and not letting yourself get caught up in that moment, but being able to see a greater purpose than the stress that you feel at that moment. He says this, do not let your hearts be troubled, trust in God. Do you really trust in God? Think about it. Do you really? Do you trust him enough to obey him? When you're stressed, do you trust enough to pray? Is that your first response? Or do you try to handle it yourself? So he says, trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you, I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place I'm going. What's Jesus telling them? He says this. Guys, listen, trust us. We love you. We care about you. We've come here to reach out to you. He's trying to say, and then he says, there's a future ahead of you that's greater than what you have now, no matter what the world throws at you. No matter what the stress is, no matter what the challenge is, there's a greater thing ahead of you. I've prepared a place for you. I'm going to be with you forever. I've got this opportunity for you, and there's a place for you that's better than anything you can ask or imagine, as we know the scriptures talk about. Jesus, it talks about in 1 Peter chapter 2, it talks about then when he was going to die, he entrusted himself to God. Jesus trusted God. He knew he would raise him from the dead. He knew he would raise him up. We have to learn to have that same trust in God. But we won't learn that trust unless we do it in the day-to-day stresses, knowing he's going to take care of me. I can't let this overwhelm me. But if we always get overwhelmed with each situation, it's hard to grow an ability to trust him because we're trying to handle it all on our own. He's saying, listen, we're going to help you. We've got a place for you that's better than anywhere that you can ever imagine. So if you think about this trust, you got to ask about it. Is this characteristic of your life, really? I mean, we all say we trust God. But do you really truly believe that he's got a place prepared for you that's greater than anything you can ask or imagine? Do you really believe that heaven is real? Do you really believe that God wants to be with you forever? That this earth that we have right now, that what you're dealing with all the stresses, whether it's the COVID virus, the racial issues, the violence issues, all the different things going on, do you really believe that God has something better for you? Because if you don't, you're going to be overwhelmed by distress. Because we're trying to live here as our main focus instead of realizing there's a better focus, there's a better place, there's a better way to live. Let's look at another one, John 14. Over and over again, you see this concept going on, verse 25. Jesus says, all this I have spoken with you, still with you. He's trying to prepare them for his death. But the counsel of the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give you to the world, I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let your hearts be troubled. He's saying, listen, this is going to happen, but I've given you my Holy Spirit. I've given you the Holy Spirit. He's going to come to you, and he's going to help you through these challenges. He says, I'm giving you peace, and that peace that we know about later in Philippians is a peace that passes even understanding. We can't even understand how great it is, but the only way we get to experience it is if we trust God. He says, do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. You heard me say, I am going away and I am coming back to you. If you love me, you would be glad that I am going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. I have told you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe. I will not speak with you much longer, for the prince of this world is coming. He has no hold on me. But the world must learn that I love the Father, and I do exactly what my Father has commanded me. Come now, let us leave. And he's telling them that this, guys, what I'm doing right now is I'm trusting myself to God. I'm doing exactly what God says to me. Satan has no hold over me. It's really important to realize that as a disciple, Satan does not have power over you unless you give it to him. Yes, he's going to tempt you, and yes, we do fall. But we don't have to. We really don't. And God's saying, I'm going to be with you. And Jesus didn't. But the point is that Jesus is going to win the battle. He's proven you that he's more powerful than death, that God is worthy of being trusted. He's going to be killed, tortured, and then raised back to life. And they can go back and look at this and say, you know what? It's worth it to trust God. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we realize, we think that now is the most important thing. But the future with Christ is way more important. He's trying to teach us this. And in our world, we don't get that pressure, we don't get that mindset anywhere we go, except in the scriptures, except in the body. And we really need to encourage each other with this concept is, guys, listen, I know this is challenging right now, and not to make it trivial, but really empathize with people. But the truth is, what God has before us is greater. It's much better. And he's proven it by what he's done. Satan does not have the authority over you. It's really important. So let's go to the garden in Matthew 26. Matthew 26. Now, I'm going through a lot of these examples because I'm trying to teach you a pattern. But if you look at this stuff, you could read over it and just say, Jesus did that. He's not saying just Jesus did that. He's trying to teach us how to deal with it. That's why he tells us we're troubled. He's troubled. Matthew 26:36. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. You guys know this is in the garden. And he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and what? And troubled. Then he says this to him. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. There's stress. Stay here and keep watch with me. So here's an important step. The people that you know are going to help you through it, have them with you. When you're stressed, don't try to do it on your own. Don't build up a wall around you. Don't feel I can handle it on my own. If Jesus wants people with him, we need people with us too. Right now, with all the viral things coming on, Satan's trying to separate us. The last thing you need to do is allow yourself to be pulled out away from the body. We need each other. Jesus tells us that. And even though they didn't do it well with him, he's teaching us over and over again from what he shared with the different people along the way. We need each other. And then he says this, going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Could you not watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible for this cup to be taken away from me, unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he comes back, he found them sleeping again. And so the important thing about this is prayer. I think we do too much on our own. We're so used to, okay, here's a problem, we're going to fix it. I do that way too much. It's so easy to think, all right, I'm a problem solver. That's what I try to do at work. That's what I try to do in the church. But really, God's much better at that than I am. And I need to make sure that my first response to any challenge is to pray. Teach this to your children. Teach this to yourselves. Pray together. Make sure, guys, that we're following Jesus' example. If you go back and read when John the Baptist died, and Jesus tried to withdraw to himself to have some time alone. He comes into the people following, a big crowd of people, and he feeds the 5,000. He gives to them. Then he goes away and he goes up the mountain to pray through the night. And then he goes out and walks on the water. But the point about that is he was, in that situation, he had this great stress. And what was his response? Pray. Here, it's pray. Jesus is in contact with the Father all the time. He lives in contact with him. That's how he builds trust. I urge you to make prayer a priority in your life. If you're really stressing a lot of what's going on, you need to pray more. You really do. God has a plan. God is working. I don't know exactly how it's going to work through all this stuff, but you know what? There's a lot of things that I have not had an idea how it was going to happen, and I go back and look and say, God worked. He changed lives. He changed my life. He changed my family's life. So it's critical to learn from Jesus in this situation. Men, ladies, we got to pray. If you're feeling stressful, spend more time in prayer. Spend a night in prayer. But turn it over to God and allow God to work. He's more powerful than us. He really has a plan for everything. And again, we don't all know what it is, but that's where we have to trust him. But he's done pretty good so far. So don't let the troubles of this day overwhelm us. Jesus, remember, he says, in this world you will have trouble. He says, but take heart, I have overcome the evil one. So I want you to think about this. Just in conclusion, I want to give you a couple thoughts. We have to turn our focus away from ourselves and our ability and the stress we see around us. Our focus has to be on God, on others, and on our purpose. We have to change our direction, our thinking. Second thing is we have to learn to trust him. He is trustworthy. Go back and read the scriptures over and over and over again. He loves us. He cares about us. He's prepared a place for us. We've got to realize that there is a destination, a purpose, and a plan that's greater than this earth. We're all not going to last forever on here, but we are in heaven. Don't let the things of this earth keep you from the destination that Jesus died to give you. Learn to pray. Pray by yourself. Pray with involve other people in your life. And remember, I want you to turn with me to, Romans chapter 16. It's really important to realize that what happened with Jesus and the cross and the things that last week we talked about, yes, there was stress over and over and over again, but he stayed faithful. He entrusted God. God was trustworthy, and he defeated Satan. Satan was defeated at that time. Jesus says, take heart, I have overcome the world. He says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And my point about that is, that means Jesus was victorious. That means Jesus is victorious now. And that Jesus will be victorious in the end. Jesus is the champion. He won. So that means that you, standing side by side with him, are going to win too, through all the stresses that you have. But you can't do it on your own. By yourself, you can't beat Satan. But with Jesus, you will beat Satan. Listen to this in Romans chapter 16, verse 20. It says this, the God of peace will soon crush Satan, not under his feet, but under your feet. The victory belongs to Christ. The victory belongs to the church. The church will never be defeated, it says. So, brothers and sisters, let's stop living as if the earth was our destination, as if we don't believe in the power of God. Let's allow ourselves to surrender our heart to Christ, just like Jesus did in the garden. He comes back to God and says, man, if this can be taken from me in the end, I'll do your will. We have to have that ability to transition, that we're not worried about ourselves, knowing we can trust in God and to do his will, and knowing in that we will always be victorious when we surrender ourselves to God. I hope this is helpful to you. I know this is not easy. So much of it's not easy because we're so caught up in the different things of the world. It's so hard to sometimes escape those things. Don't give up trying. You will be victorious. Jesus is the victor. Thanks for your attention. Let's try to get rid of the stress and get closer to Christ. Thanks so much for your evening, and we're going to go ahead and take a little quick break and then go on to our marriage class where we talk about sexuality. Thanks, guys. Good evening, everybody. Great to be with you. I have a couple announcements before we get started on our marriage class. The first one is we ask you to be praying a lot for Kiran. Right now, as she is getting close to the deadline for her to get her visa approved, please be praying for her. She deeply, deeply wants to stay here with us, her family, the church. And it's very, very important to her. I would ask for you to not only pray, but if you could, to spend some time fasting for her. And the second prayer request is also Lori Gilbert has got some medical procedures coming up even tomorrow, so please be praying for her as well. And also tonight, Allison is not up front with me, but she is here in the building. And if you have questions during the class tonight, please text those to her or put her on the Facebook. Probably would, either one of those is great, and she will try to bring those up and ask me to comment on those as we go. Tonight is an interesting class. It's sexuality and marriage, and we've had classes on this before in the past. I think it's really, really important. But I want to start it out with talking about, because of all the confusion about sexuality in America, how does God feel about sex? I mean, that's really the key thing. And I think sometimes we feel like, is God embarrassed? Does he not want to know we're having sex or things like that? Or does he think sex is a sin? And the answer is absolutely not. God made us. It's not something you have to hide or worry about. God, he created sex to be pleasurable. Think about that. He made it that way. It doesn't have to be that way. He made an orgasm feel great. He created a clitoris to be pleasurable. That's why it's there. So it was God's plan from the very beginning that man would have a husband and wife, be a husband and wife, and that this was his plan, that it would enhance the strength of the marriage, that it would enhance the relationship. And there's some things I want to talk to you about that in a few more minutes, but this is God's plan. Sex outside of a marriage is sin. But the reality is, in a marriage, it's not at all. It's made by God for pleasure and even for strengthening the bond in marriage. So it's really a critical thing. And in Proverbs chapter 5, I want to read this verse to you, verse 18 and 19. It says this. It says, "May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. A loving doe, a graceful deer, may her breasts satisfy you always. May you ever be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife?" What he's telling you, he wants us to be captivated by the love in marriage. And that captivated word is kind of like intoxicated. It's one of those few things in the Bible that's okay to be intoxicated with, is love for your spouse. The only other one that I know of is be intoxicated with the Holy Spirit. And that's the whole kind of, but other than that, intoxication isn't good. But here in marriage, it's supposed to be like, it's supposed to be this where you kind of get lost in this relationship of love and affection with your spouse. That's God's plan. I want to show you another one like that. Song of Songs in chapter 5. And if you go, if you want to really learn about what the Bible thinks about sexuality, this Song of Songs is a great section of the Bible. It spends a lot of time talking about that. There's obvious references to sexuality in many, many ways, including in this verse that I'm going to read. And in Song of Songs, chapter 5, verse 1, it says this. "I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk." And the people looking on is like speaking on behalf of God. People think, "Eat, O friends, and drink. Drink your fill, O lovers." And this is the concept of being intoxicated with each other. This is God's plan. So this mindset that sometimes we grow up with this thing, okay, sex is bad, can't do that, and then all of a sudden you can, and then we kind of don't know how to handle it. But the reality is God wants you to enjoy it. He made it that way. Sex is like a thermometer. Right now, every time I go into my office or I go somewhere, I go to Florida State, I have to get my temperature checked, and I don't want it to be high because that would be a problem. But in marriage, you want your temperature to be hot. The thermometer needs to be up there where it's moving. And the problem is, it's not that way a lot of times. Lack of sex is an indicator that there are problems in the relationship, and it's a super, super common problem. Typically, those problems in the relationship that make the temperature drop way down are communication issues, undealt with problems, lack of forgiveness, selfishness, and sometimes there's even medical reasons. And some of those medical reasons can be resolved, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But there's a lot of reasons why that hot temperature, that excitement, that intoxication of love that God wants us to have isn't there. And I'll tell you, I'm amazed at how few marriages that I know have good or great sexual relationships. I don't know that many couples but both couples are really happy with what's going on. It's really a big problem. And this is harmful for the health of a relationship. It opens up the door to Satan to come in and attack the marriage, and he does it all the time. And so many affairs, so many marriages are ruined over this issue. Now remember, this sex isn't necessarily the primary problem. It's a result of other problems, and it becomes a primary problem. So it's really important that undealt with issues, lack of forgiveness, poor communication, selfishness especially, these things are going to lead to bad sex life. And they need to be dealt with because you're making yourself and your partner vulnerable for Satan's attack. And he will attack. He will do it. And this doesn't have to be the case. A marriage can be great, even though there's challenges. Every single marriage has challenges in it, all of them. There's difficult things. But you remember that sexuality is a gift from God for you to give your spouse. And it's when healthy, it increases the closeness, increases the joy, and the health. Actually, it makes you, when your sexual relationship is healthy, it makes you more healthy. There's a lot of interesting things that happen. I'm going to just read a few of them from the medical side of things. But sexuality is associated with an increase in a hormone called oxytocin. This is the bonding one. This is the one that gives happiness and contentment. This is a mother breastfeeding a child. This bond that pulls you closer to that person. And this doesn't happen just with intercourse. It happens with affection. It happens with hugging. It happens with kissing. It's this affection. It actually feeds into more. So when you ignore your spouse, you actually are not just ignoring them. You're actually decreasing the closeness that you should have. When you don't hug, when you don't kiss, what you're doing is you're actually losing the opportunity to grow closer together, to bond with each other. And that's why it's interesting if you go back and when people have sex outside of marriage, what happens is you still create oxytocin. So you wonder why are those people together? This person's really bad for this person. It's because of, one of the things is it creates this bonding hormone when you have sex with them. And so you kind of get blind sometimes to some of the bad things that are going on. So God intends for that to enhance your relationship. It's a good, healthy thing to say. You look at that person and say, I love that person. You see an old couple together and they've been together for all these years and they look at each other and you know that they love each other. It's that stuff working. Cortisol, if we just did a class on stress, goes way up with all the different things that are going on. You know how to decrease it? Sex. Decreases cortisol. It increases serotonin. You know the medicine we take for depression tries to increase serotonin? So does sex. This doesn't happen just with intercourse, with orgasm. It happens with hugging, with kissing. It enhances the mood in your relationship. It enhances your personal mood. It makes you feel better. It gives you more contentment and decreases depression. Dopamine is another thing that goes up. And this is the addiction thing. You want this person. So you do this and you want that person more. It's the way God made us. So testosterone, estrogen increase. And those are healthy things in our body. So I want you to think God made you this way. This was his design. So sex isn't a bad thing. Sex is a good thing. But it doesn't work great in a lot of marriages, which is really sad to me. Again, sex is more than intercourse, and it's tied in with affection. And I just want to read a few positive things just about what affection does. Hugs. Hugging someone decreases blood pressure, decreases stress, improves sleep, and increases your immune response. So you want to fight against COVID? Hug each other more. Just the ones, you don't hug everybody. Obviously, that's the bad thing about it. But in your marriage, hug each other. All right? Because the other people can't hug right now, so you got to be the hugger. All right? Kissing. Kissing is also a great indication of intimacy because you can hug somebody sometimes and not really. But kissing each other is a little harder to fake that. And it increases your oxytocin, increases your serotonin, dopamine, and it lowers cholesterol too. How about that? Cholesterol, you don't even have to take a pill. Just start kissing more. It's good stuff. All right. So I want to talk about issues, and what's the problems, and what are the problems? And this is one of the biggest ones that I'm going to read, and I want to talk to you about. And I pray that you will really listen to this. Okay, one person is interested and the other isn't. And commonly you hear this: the men are the ones that are upset and want more frequency and participation. But I know many women who have the same issue. And so I want you to think about this: is in your marriage. This is great to think about. Yeah, I know this person's doing that. I know that. Right. But the point is, in your marriage, are you guys like that? There's one person where they're interested, the other isn't. And what happens is this. You must understand that if you want, in all marriages, there's this desire to feel wanted. You want your husband, your wife to want you, to desire you. I mean, that's what they make movies about this stuff. It's that thing where you feel wanted and needed and cared for. And sexuality is one of the greatest ways to do that. And when you don't do that, sometimes we think, oh, it's just sex. It's not. It's telling your partner, I don't desire you, I don't find you attractive, I don't want you. That's the way it feels to many, many people. You may not feel that way, but I can tell you it's extremely likely that your partner does. And so it's a really, really important thing. It leaves this marriage vulnerable. When you don't have sexual relationship with your spouse, when you don't give them affection, what you're doing is you're setting it up to make that person walk around and feel like you don't really care about them. You don't really, they don't mean that much to you. That's the way people feel. So don't allow yourself to fall into that trap. If there's a problem, get it fixed. It's really a problem. And you know the biggest problem of this? Reality is like everything else in spirituality, isn't it? It's selfishness. We get focused in on ourselves. We are unwilling to give. We're unwilling to get involved. We're too often looking for reasons not to be involved, to be sexually giving to the other person, instead of finding ways to be involved. I want you to think about this. The classic thing is, I got a headache all the time, you know? And the mindset is that, you know, if you're always finding, okay, I got a little bit of a headache, I don't want to do this, what's going to happen is the spouse is going to feel like, I really just don't, she or he doesn't really want me. And that's what happens in the mind if that happens over and over again. Find a way to make it great. Let's look in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I want to read something with you. It's really important. This thing is God tells us it's important here in this section, but don't allow Satan to get in there and make it an issue of, okay, conditions have to be perfect every time. It has to be right. Find a way to make it happen a lot, okay? All right, so 1 Corinthians 7, verse 5. It says this, do not deprive each other. He's talking about sexuality in this situation. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourself to prayer. Then come back together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. The point about this is this. Guys, it says not to deprive each other. That means not to withhold sex because you're upset with a person, because you don't want to give. That's not an excuse. Sometimes there's problems and it needs to be dealt with. But the reality is we need to be giving to each other. It's not okay to feel justified because this person did something bad to me yesterday and I'm going to withhold sex. Sex is not a tool to hold against each other. It's not a weapon. Don't ever allow Satan to get it to do that. We have to learn to be selfless. Remember, what is a disciple's job? Is to be loving, right? And that's the agape word, which means to be selfless. If it's not in your sexual life, it's probably not in your marriage. And that's a really, really key thing. You need to look at it. So people will ask, okay, so you're not supposed to deprive each other, you're not supposed to withhold sex. How often is right? Do we mean, let's say, we want to have sex 3 times a day? Well, I don't think the Bible doesn't say that. So this is a communication issue, because if you have never sat down and talked about which each one of you would really want and how important it is to you, then you're not going to get what you want, really. And so I've looked up studies on this, and the studies are hugely variant in marriage. It's like 4 times a week is kind of an upper side, but people sometimes do it more often. I know people that have to do sex even more than that. And then you go down to less than 1 a month, which is healthy, which is okay. It depends on the marriage, but I can tell you if it's not very frequent, it's not a good thing. If you're not having sex regularly, I will be very surprised if one of you isn't really hurting. So it's critical to communicate. All right, you as a spouse are the only person that can meet that need of your spouse. You're the only one. Okay, unless you're sinning and stepping outside of that marriage. Other people can do it, but I don't think either spouse is going to be comfortable with that. So you are the only person that can meet this need and make your spouse feel desired and not rejected. Because if you're not doing it, I guarantee you, one of you is feeling rejected by your spouse, whether it's emotionally or physically. This needs to be a priority, though. You need to make sure that you are getting together, talking about this, and dealing with it. Don't have someone else to talk about it. If you haven't talked about it, you sit down and talk with your spouse about it. What if there are physical problems That's a real problem. I take care of that actually fairly frequently in my office, just about every day actually. And there's things that can be done about a lot of those things, and sometimes they can't, but really get advice on this, because don't allow this thing to just be a physical problem that keeps you from allowing to enjoy yourself, each other sexually. There's maybe abuse history and may cause problem with that. Guys, get help on that. It's not something you just want to live with and let it dominate your life. Get help. You can overcome that. There's things like erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, all those different things. They can be helped. People sometimes have a really difficult time having an orgasm. Again, don't just ignore it. There's these things that can be done, and it's much more comfortable to talk to your physician about it. And really, don't just say, okay, we're just not going to be able to have that. And even if you have things that you can't do, there are other things that you can still do sexually. Maybe you can't have intercourse regularly for some reason, but there's other things you can do sexually to give to each other. Make your partner know that you desire them. Find a way to give to them. You can have great intimacy, great sexual fulfillment outside of just one act. All right, so another thing, guys, have fun. Sometimes it gets so serious and so heavy, and it's like a performance. If you don't do this just right, laugh a little bit. It's okay. Don't laugh at each other, and don't ever make fun of each other sexually. Because in sexuality, you're vulnerable. You're risking yourself. It's one of the more vulnerable times, which is what creates greater intimacy. But if you're making fun of the other person, you're hurting yourself. Actually, you're hurting your marriage. You're making that person feel undesired and rejected. So be creative. Do things differently. Make it fun. Just don't hurt each other. And it comes to the concept of what can we do? And I'm not going to go into all that stuff tonight. We've talked about this a lot before. But make sure if there's things that one of you want to try, talk about it. You know, there's certain things that are okay, but both of you may not want to do. But if it's something that you don't want to do, make sure that you're giving in plenty of other areas. Just don't draw lines, and just allow yourself to be a little bit more flexible if you can, adaptable to things. If there are unresolved relationships, relationship issues making you feel less interested, you need to resolve those. For example, this is not the case, but let's say that Allison was really upset at me, or I was really upset with her, and we were in a situation where we had this anger going on, and it's because of that we weren't having a sexual relationship. That's not okay. That has to be dealt with. If there's things that need to be forgiven, if there's things that need to be dealt with, you must deal with those things. Don't let Satan sneak into your marriage. All right, so sex is also something. You know, I read this thing about depriving each other. Okay, so we're not going to do that. So I'm going to have sex as an obligation is not the right mindset either. Because sexuality is a giving. It's not just, okay, I'm going to do this. Because nobody really wants that kind of partner. You know, you want someone who's going to give back to you. It is okay sometimes for what we call a quickie or something like that. But the reality is, if that's all what happens, then there's not the passion, the closeness, the vulnerability, the intimacy that you need to have in that. It's easier, for example, for husbands to have orgasm typically than women. Not always the case, but usually it is. So make sure, husbands, you're not just thinking about yourself. That's another big problem with sexuality. If it's, okay, I'm going to have my orgasm and then, I'm done. That's not a giving man. That's not the way you do it. It's selfless, thinking of the other person more than yourself. So make sure that you deal with self. All right. One of the other problems that happens with sexuality sometimes is that one of the persons or both of the people don't really feel that attractive and think, how could you really want me? And we're sometimes so critical about that. But the person that married you because they love you. And so do your very, very best. If there's issues that are causing you problems with attractiveness, to do your very best with them, okay? But you work together. If there's something that's bothering Allison about me, I want her to tell me about it, but not in a way that's derogatory, not in a way that's making fun of me, and say, how can I make this better? So work together on things like that. Don't be critical about the way that the person looks unless you're going to help work together and support each other to get where you want. And be really careful about people and being sensitive about that. So another problem, husbands can be not engaged all day. For example, what I mean is this. You come home, you're doing all these things, you go and you watch TV. Right now, there's nothing to watch on TV anyway, really. At least I don't know of anything, but there probably is for some people. But so you go in there, you're doing all this all day, you're doing this, and you don't talk with your wife, you don't spend any time with her, and then you go to bed and say, okay, you ready to go have sex? And the answer is probably not, because then they just feel used. And so it's really important that you work together, that you share life together, that you, when you have the opportunity, you're side by side working together. That's what makes you attractive to each other. If you're not on this little island and all of a sudden you come together, okay, it's bad, we're going to have sex. That's not the way that you have a great relationships. You create an atmosphere in your home. You create an atmosphere of kindness and affection. Set the mood every day for love and romance. Every day, set the mood. You may not have sex every day. Probably most people don't. But the reality is, that's not the point. You want to set the mood in your home where your partner feels loved all the time. If you know that they love affection, then be affectionate. If you know they love acts of service, then you serve. Be really, really careful, because you can destroy so much with just a sarcastic, derogatory word. And don't be so sensitive to all of us, but the reality is it still hurts when you tear that other person down. And you can do so much damage with just a few words. And you all have had people do that to you. Don't ever do that to your spouse. Another issue, hygiene. This is part of the atmosphere. Hygiene is critical. Brush your teeth. I know that sounds bad, but brush your teeth. It matters, Who wants to kiss someone that doesn't smell good? I mean, now don't pick on the person about that. Just say, hey, this bothers me. We need to do better about brushing our teeth, and floss your teeth. Flossing your teeth is really important. It gives you longer life, but it also takes bad breath away. It's a really good thing. Brothers, maybe sisters too, shave, all right? I'm saying sisters too from the legs, not necessarily for the facial fur, but if you have it, that's all right, because just shave, right? Wash your body off, okay? So intimacy and stink don't go really that well together. All right, it's just important. If you want your spouse to be affectionate with you, showering is a good thing. Soap is a really beautiful thing. Those kind of things are really good. Speaking of bodies and smells, don't criticize or make fun of your partner's body, including smells. Different things like that. What happens is you make them less willing to give. If a person has something that's a deformity, people have a hard time sometimes. If a person isn't right, has surgery or different things like that. Be kind. Love that person. That's the person you married that you love. Make them feel loved no matter what. If there's something that isn't good, you go to oral sex, tastes bad, different things like that. Guys, really, just talk to each other about it. All those things can be worked out, but don't make fun of each other and don't break each other down and any things like that. Build each other up. Children. Children are blessings from God. We know that. However, they're not blessings for the sex life. So a couple things I want to say about this. First of all, once children can start walking, that's a great thing. But if you don't close your door or sometimes lock your door, depending on how old they are, you may find them walking into something that you really don't necessarily want them walking into. And so I encourage you to allow, in order to relax both people, the husband and the wife, you don't have to worry about someone coming in and saying, hey, Dad, can you get me something? Hey, Mom, can you? That's just can ruin a really beautiful time sometimes. So make sure you close the door or lock it as necessary. Don't allow children also to take away from sexuality. And this is a really, really common problem in marriage. It happens a lot when you have your child and you can't have sex, at least at first, or with intercourse, and the child makes you both really tired. And sometimes the mother will really bond to the child and get really close to the child, and the husband feels like, well, you kind of almost feel displaced, but you don't want to say anything because you love the child too. But make sure that you talk to each other about this situation. Don't allow Satan to come in there and put you in a position where he separates you with the blessing from God. It's really, really important. So talk about this. This is a common affair issue. Actually, it's a really, really common affair problem. Fatigue. Fatigue is a part of life. We all get tired. And you need to make sure that you plan, because sexuality is so important, to find ways to have a sexual. It doesn't have to be just when the lights go out at night. There's other times you can do this. All right, you can have dates set up for different times of the day. You can have things. You can plan around this. And if you're always too sleepy, go to bed earlier. Find a way, because this is a critical thing to be involved with each other, to give to each other. Sex dates, all right? Oh, I already said that. Cell phone. So the cell phone is probably one of the most damaging things to the sex life. It is something that you get caught up in. You don't mean to be, you just start reading this and you get this, and especially right now, all this nonsense going on everywhere, all this crazy stuff, the COVID virus and people saying this is going to give them infect and this is not, and wear a mask or don't wear a mask. All these different things going on, and we get caught up in the phone, Facebook or whatever. Be careful, guys. Do you really think that's more important than your spouse? Technology, the TV, the video games, all those things can be fun and great, but guys, they really aren't better than your spouse. And if that relationship isn't going well, you need to be investing in it instead of those other things. Make sure that you don't let those things get in the way. Pets. Now, some of you have pets in the room. Some of you have pets in the bed. It's fine if you can really have a great sex with that. It's just hard for me to have Fido sitting there, watching you do something or jumping on top of you or whatever noise that Fido's making while you're doing it. That just would be harder for me. Maybe it's okay for you. Just think about that. If you might want to move, just at least to take them out for a little while. But that's just my advice on that. Music can be good. Setting the mood is good. You can make your room a little more romantic instead of having stuff throwing all over. It's just, if you got car parts laying on the bed or something like that, or all your books laying this way, it's kind of hard to really sometimes create the right mood and the right atmosphere that you want. A couple more thoughts about atmosphere that I want to say is there's a good encouragement rule that I read one time that if you have positive feedback, 5-to-1 rule versus negative feedback. So you got to tell each other the truth. Remember, we've talked about that earlier. And so if there's something that's bothering you or something that's not good, you have to speak the truth. But if the only truth that you speak is when you're upset with a partner, you're telling them something wrong, or they didn't do this right, what happens is you create a very negative atmosphere in your home. There's so many things that you should find good about your spouse. Hopefully they're attractive to you. Hopefully you appreciate them doing the jobs that they're doing around the home or at work. Find ways to build up your spouse so they know that you care about them. It's very easy to do, but some of us grow up with this mindset of criticism, and this person has to be perfect. And what we do is we find the things that bug us about this person, and we forget about all the good things. Why did you marry him or her? And so go back to the mindset of this person is special and I need to treat them special. He or she is a gift from God to you. And make sure you treat them that way and make them feel that way. Sometimes the reason why they're not that way is because we tear them down so much. Make sure that you let them know that their words are valuable, that what they're doing is valuable, that you care. You notice them doing something good or something creative. Tell them, hey, I'm really thankful for you. Don't take each other for granted. I did mention sexual problems, but I want to bring this up too. I skipped over this and forgot to do this. Is sometimes when people have a sexual problem, like let's say erection difficulties or something like that, don't ever make fun of them because it will make it much, much more difficult for them to be able to perform. Anything that you're making fun of or you ridicule will actually hurt the chance of having a better sexual relationship in the future. It's not okay to do that. But do laugh together about fun things, but not at each other's, to hurt each other. All right, so full body hugs several times a day is a great thing to start doing. Holding hands, touching each other. Remember we talked earlier about the bids to the relationship. A bid is an attempt to address communication with your spouse, to try to get them to talk to you, or to share something with them. If you ignore them all the time, or if you make fun of them, or if you tell them what you're saying doesn't matter, you know what? You're rejecting them. Not just there, but in every area. So don't reject your spouse. When they make a bid to you to hold hands or to kiss or to do those things, respond. Respond back with love. Read Song of Songs together. It's a really good thing to read. It'll bring up questions. You think this means this? You think this means that? If you're interested, there's a good commentary that I think is online. I'll be happy to share that with you. Talk about your sex desires together. Talk about those things. It's okay. Don't, you have things going on that you would like to do or you're concerned about or you're afraid of or you want to do differently, talk to each other about that. Don't wait for the other person to change. You be the giver. When this person starts doing this, then I'm going to start giving him sex relationship. Don't do that. That's a selfish thing to do. Sex is an extension of a day lived in love. Okay, really. If you want a great sex life, live a life of love all day long. Because if you don't, sex is an expression of love, of intimacy. So if you want great sex life, again, live your day in love. Greet each other warmly at the end of the day and when you leave. Make it something where you're leaving, you're going to work, you're separating from each other for a while, but you have that affection. And when you come back together, it's, hey, man, I'm so happy to see you. Don't ignore each other. Stop what you're doing, come together and share that with each other. Another thing, just for you married people, if you're helping a brother or sister to talk about sex, that's single, talk about sex, that's great. Don't flippantly bring up sex in front of singles that are trying to stay pure. That's just not fair. Don't talk about your sex life with them. Now, if you're trying to counsel and help them and they're just having struggles with it, and you're in a discipling relationship with them, that's a different thing. But I've heard people just start talking about sex in front of a bunch of single people standing there, and it's like, I don't think that's a really fair thing for a disciple to do. Be sensitive about those things. So that's really my talk that I wanted to give to you about sexuality. There's a whole lot more that we could talk about, but I really wanted to address the issues and make sure, because I know so many people who aren't happy with their sex life and they feel stuck. And guys, it can be fixed. This is not something that you just have to say, okay, well, it's not going to be good. That's Satan's way of dealing with it. God's way of dealing with this, let's deal with the issues and let's make this great, because God intended for you to be intoxicated with your love for your spouse. So having said that, if you have any questions, or if anyone has sent any to Allison, I'll be happy to answer those, or try to answer those to the best of my ability. And if you haven't sent anything in yet, we don't actually have anything in yet. So I'm going to finish in just a second with that, unless you send something in very quickly. But I really do pray that you each can have that intimacy, that vulnerability, that plan that God has for your marriage. He still has that plan for your marriage. Whether you're married for a week or 40 years, it doesn't really matter. God wants you to have that. And you can have it. You may have to overcome some difficulties. But guys, it's worth it. It really is a very, very valuable thing. So, Allie, anything on that? Okay, brothers and sisters, love you. Let's deal with these issues. Let's make them great, and let's support each other. And again, talk to each other. If you're talk to another couple, and I'm sure we can all help it get better. Love you guys, and I will see you on Sunday morning. Remember, we have our 2 services, one at 8 o'clock for those people who are at higher risk, and then at 10 o'clock for those people who are at lower risk. Make sure, guys, it's the law now. We do it anyway. We're going to wear a mask. I'll even be wearing a mask Sunday when I speak. I'm not too worried about speaking today because there's people in the way back with masks on, and Allie right close to me, and Allie and I live together, so I'm not worried about it. But Sunday, I'm going to preach in a mask. So we're going to all follow those rules that the city has asked us to do. Love you. Have a great night.